Hey everybody, this is Tim Gallaudet, the Deputy Administrator at NOAA, and I want to talk to you a little bit today about what we're doing to usher in a new age of ocean exploration. And just like Lewis and Clark did in 1804, embarking on a survey of the new America, we are embarking on a survey of America's ocean frontier. And in fact, most of America is underwater, over 50%, and we are embarking on this frontier of surveying and exploration to map that area of our exclusive economic zone. So briefly, I just want to share three main elements of this work. First off, it's implementing a presidential memorandum to map, explore, and characterize the U.S. exclusive economic zone that was signed in November of 2019. So we're very excited about that and having the White House top cover and support for us doing this. The second element that I wanted to talk about was NOAA's science and technology areas. We've developed strategies for six emerging S&T areas that are helping us understand our oceans and apply that knowledge to benefit the American people. These areas include autonomous systems, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, data, citizen science, and a thing called omics, which is basically microbiological big data. So we're very excited about advancing those areas that will help us better understand our changing ocean, as well as apply that knowledge to benefit the American people through applications such as energy, tourism and recreation, critical minerals, and pharmaceuticals. The last element of our ocean exploration initiative involves partnerships, and partnerships with some of the individuals we're going to hear from next. We're very excited about that because with partnerships of key ocean S&T agencies and organizations, it's allowing us to do more with what we have. So in the whole idea of being stronger together, we're working with folks like OceanX and Dr. Vince Pieribone using his science and assets of the Aleutian and Aleutian 2 to explore and map and use NOAA scientists to augment his great team. We're also working with Joyda Vermani at the Schmidt Ocean Institute, and we'll be signing an agreement fairly soon to do the same kind of work in tandem with her fine team. And then lastly, we're working with Dr. Fred Wariski at the Ocean Tracking Network, and he's done wonderful things to help us in such a diverse array of activity, such as tracking Atlantic salmon and studying the ecology of seals in the Atlantic. So through these great ocean partnerships, we're understanding our ocean frontier better than we ever have, and we're applying it to benefit the American people in the 21st century. Thank you. Next on the agenda is Dr. Vince Pieribone of OceanX. Vince, take it away.
Thank you, Tim. And can I just say what an honor it is to be here with such a distinguished panel, and I'd really like to thank you for inviting me today, and it's great to see you, Tim. And yes, to your point, OceanX is a collaborative organization, and having interactions and having collaborations with NOAA has been one of the high points of my tenure here at OceanX. So OceanX is a nonprofit, and it's founded on the idea that the ocean is unexplored. Large portions of it are unexplored. And our goal as a nonprofit is to utilize our research assets, mainly our research vessel, to explore the far reaches of the ocean and bring those discoveries back to the public. And we have a sort of a dual focus in our program, which is the exploration and the science of the ocean, but also the education and bringing it back through media and educational products to the world. And we link those two very tightly to each other because we strongly feel that in order for the world to truly appreciate the ocean, it has to see the ocean in all its beauty and grandeur. And those of us who've had the luxury and the fortunateness and been fortunate enough to get into the ocean and see these things firsthand, know that when you see these things, you'll love the ocean and you'll feel the emotional connection to it that those of us who spend time studying the ocean feel. So our mission centers around a research vessel. As Tim mentioned, we have a large oceanographic vessel. That's a second one. We have an Aleutian, which was in the works for about 7 years. We used it. Now we have a new vessel, Aleutian 2, which we just recently renamed Ocean Explorer 1. That boat will be out of the shipyard in August and will begin a mission of exploring all the oceans of the world and bringing them back to people. So this vessel, we started from square one to be a state-of-the-art, really high-tech really cool ocean exploration vessel. It has all the tools of the trade, from submarines to ROVs, remote operated robots to go underwater, CTDs, helicopters, drones, molecular biology laboratories to work on some of the omics that Tim mentioned earlier in his presentation. And this is like a floating oceanographic university on the ocean. And the goal is to bring this amazing thing to countries around the world in collaboration with local people and local scientists, and study and explore and reveal places of the ocean that have never been discovered before. So it's an absolutely exciting trip we're on. We begin in earnest in, say, October. We'll probably begin exploring the Atlantic and the ocean, both in the north and the south, starting in October of this year. So we're really excited as a team to work together with a lot of organizations. We've worked together with NOAA, as you heard, and also the Schmidt Ocean Initiative is also one of our collaborators and partners in this endeavor. And we think that the ocean, being such an essential asset to humans and such an essential resource for humans, that we need to elevate its visibility and its meaning to people throughout the world, even people who aren't necessarily on the coasts or directly exposed to the ocean. So our extensive media collaborations allow us to go to these remote locations, observe these absolutely phenomenal and amazing events, study them, understand how they impact us, but also bring amazing imagery back to the public so the public can be there firsthand. So we're excited to begin that endeavor in a new way with our new vessel in October, and hope you join us.
Vince, that was great. Thanks for sharing all the good work that OceanX is doing to help us understand the oceans and explore them. Now, let's hear from Schmidt Ocean Institute's Dr. Joytika Brahmani.
Thank you, Tim. And thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of this panel on a new age of exploration at the first ever virtual chow. #virtual chow, just a reminder. As we all know, this was meant to be a big year for biodiversity, for the ocean, for the climate, and the environment in general as we look towards the next decade. And actually, I think it still is, but just not in the way that we envisioned that it would be. This pandemic has brought home to all of us that we as humans are a part of this planet's ecosystem. We're a part of nature in a way that every human on this planet hasn't truly experienced simultaneously for over a century. But just as it's been a big year for humanity, so too has it been a big year for me personally, as I took the helm of the Schmidt Ocean Institute towards the end of February. So the Schmidt Ocean Institute is now just over 10 years old. It was established by Eric and Wendy Schmidt in 2009, and it's operated 2 research vessels during that time. The current one, the Falcor, has been in operation continuously since 2013 on a mission to explore the ocean, very, very much akin to what Vincent just said for OceanX. This is the world's only philanthropically funded research vessel that currently operates year-round, and our research ship, the laboratories, the robotic tools, the high-performance computing facilities, we make freely available to scientists internationally to collaborate and to conduct cutting-edge science and technology development. And in exchange, we ask that they make their research and findings publicly available so that we can share it with a broader audience. Of course, 2020 has challenged all of us who are in ocean operations, but we were actually very lucky to have stayed out there at sea, because with our highly sophisticated remotely operating vehicle and its 4K camera system, we serendipitously captured this amazing siphonophore on video. It's believed to be the longest animal in the ocean at 150 feet in length, and it was discovered in April of this year in the Ningaloo Canyons off Western Australia. The ocean is so vast and so unexplored that the fact a creature of this size was seen for the first time only 2 months ago shows us how massive and strange this planet actually is. The Falcor is still at sea, but we're not allowing any scientists on board at the moment. So we're in the middle of conducting our first fully telepresence cruise. That's something that the NOAA's Oceanus Explorer has really done well in the past. And again, this is only possible through technology, with the ship, the submersible, and sophisticated communications. What you see here is Dr. Rob Beeman from James Cook University leading an expedition from his home to explore the Coral Sea. A key part of this exploration is to map the bathymetry at high resolution. So last year, the Schmidt Ocean Institute signed an MOU to commit to the Seabed 2030 program, and this video was made for that event. Seabed 2030 is a Nippon Foundation JEBCO program to map the entire seafloor by 2030 at a high resolution. And it's a key goal to address the needs of the UN Decade of Ocean Sciences. And we've contributed over 1 million square kilometers to that global database, and we'll continue to do that. The goals of Seabed 2030 will be met because actually in recent years, we've seen an increase in unmanned and autonomous technologies. Sail Drone, shown here, was an early grantee from the Schmidt Marine Technology Partners. And this shows the role that philanthropy can take in supporting potentially high-risk investments in the early stages of technology development. Another example is SeaKit. This was an unmanned surface vessel, and that's shown here, and this was part of the winning entry from the Shell Ocean Discovery X Prize, a competition for innovations to map the seafloor quickly and at high resolution. Part of this competition, of course, was a bonus prize from NOAA for innovations to detect and track a biological or chemical signal underwater autonomously, to track it to the source, which, by the way, was won by a junior high and high school student team. But this also shows the role that governments, industry, nonprofits, and academia play in spurring innovation for the future. Programs such as Seabed 2030 show that this new age of ocean exploration is not just about partnership of technological capabilities, and there's a whole bunch of examples in this slide, but it's also about partnerships across governments, philanthropic entities, industries, and NGOs, all being pulled together to address a common goal, very much like the remarks that the Admiral made at the beginning. But the technologies of the next decade to explore the ocean don't just stop at submersibles and unmanned autonomous robots or swarms. They stretch up through the water column and to the sea surface and beyond. So this image is from a cruise that took place at the end of last year, led by Dr. Chris Zappa from Columbia University, to test technology to study the sea surface microlayer using unmanned aerial systems with hyperspectral, infrared, and thermal cameras on board. Over the last 2 years, SOI has tested eDNA, artificial intelligence, robotics, novel sampling systems that allow for the collection of delicate specimens from our ROV. We're seeing an exponential rate of development in technology despite the pandemic. And that includes VR and AR technologies, which will allow us to experience the ocean in new ways and to bring it to a larger audience in new ways. In the next 2 to 5 years, I think we'll begin to see these technologies used in more and more increasingly meaningful ways to explore our deep sea. So, at a time when the entire world is aware of the power of nature, the ocean, covering 71% of our planet, is truly a smorgasbord of possibilities. Technology is getting smaller, allowing us to learn more and at increasingly cheaper costs. And this makes this next decade not only the decade for ocean science, but truly a new golden age of ocean exploration. Thank you.
Joytica, that was so well put. I will quote you on that new golden age of ocean exploration. And you and Vincent both touched on several themes that I think you'll see continue, and that is philanthropic partnerships and technology, all helping us advance our understanding of the oceans in this COVID impacted era, and telepresence being a really hallmark area of technology as well as robotics. So, next on the list is Dr. Fred Wariski of the Ocean Tracking Network.
And I want to thank you all for the kind invitation to speak to you. It is a great, great pleasure to do this. I'm also lucky to follow the previous speakers because I am a user of technologies and a constructor of a network. So they've given the classic introduction that sets the scene for me and makes it very, very easy. May I have my next slide, please? Slightly different approach here. The kinds of problems that we're facing in the oceans, the challenges are really quite remarkable. The ocean is changing really fast. Here in Halifax, where I live, every summer now, we are surrounded, not by one, not by two, but hundreds of tropical fish that are beginning to occupy Canadian waters. This is not a sign of something that's stable and not changing. And the blue growth revolution is coming down the tube at us very, very rapidly. We are all looking to the ocean for the next round of economic development, which poses an interesting problem about how do we do this in a way that is going to permit us to have all of the existing benefits that we have out there and maintain these highly valued species that coastal communities depend upon while also welcoming in this new growth. Now, animals, these highly valued animals like tuna and lobsters even, move when they don't like what they're seeing, which creates some interesting problems about trying to understand the distributions of them. In order to get a background picture about what these animals are up to and what's happening, and to be able to predict what the future is going to hold for these animals, we have to understand those movements and how the environmental drivers are moving them from point A to point B. And this is what my ocean tracking network is really all about, a network of scientists trying to use technology to address these particular issues. Next slide, please. So very similar to our previous two speakers, I'm using almost everything I can find that will let me get into this ocean, this dark, opaque place that's hostile to humans and in which we don't operate very well. I have a fleet of autonomous surface vehicles that we use, and we put on those a series of acoustic receivers that are designed to listen for tagged animals. And the tags that we put in these animals come in different sizes. The little one here that I'm wiggling is what goes into Admiral Gallaudet salmon. This one goes into Massachusetts white sharks. That one will last for 20 years. This one will give me 3 months. But from that, as long as we have acoustic receivers out in the ocean and platforms that can harvest data from them, we are able to determine the course tracks and the presence of these animals in different parts of the ocean. But the ocean is a very, very big place. And our receiver units, when put out there, can only cover about 800 meters or so in an omnidirectional area around it. So we need to enlist every other possible way to get receivers into the ocean we can. So we put them on these autonomous vehicles that run over large course tracks. We harvest animals we engage animals like seals and sharks, and we put acoustic receivers on those. And as they swim around in the ocean, they detect animals that they're frequently chasing as prey items. And every time they pop to the surface, they send us signals back via satellite tag. And we learn an awful lot about predators and prey. But they're also sensing the ocean at the same time. What is the oxygen level? What are the temperatures? What is the conductivity? And from all of that, we're getting to the point that we build the picture about what are the environmental drivers and where are the animals in that ocean. Next slide, please. But people are really critical to this, and networking the existing assets that are out there are absolutely critical to cover this very, very big ocean. NOAA, historically and now, occupies a much larger place in the global footprint of ocean exploration than any other agency in the world. We are all highly dependent on NOAA for many of the things that they've done, but they can't do everything. And so Canada has focused in on this idea of animal telemetry, on which we're pretty good, to become a specialty for our contribution to the decade of ocean science that is coming up. What we have been doing is building networks of international units that are already using these kinds of technologies, that are out there with compatible equipment, but they've only been focused on their little part of the world. And they haven't been telling people about all of these tags that they're detecting, that they have no idea what they are, but turns out are coming from many different jurisdictions. And if only we could put together a data system to exchange information and get these people to submit information about the animals they tag to that, we could build a global network in a very, very short pace. And that's exactly what our prime focus is. This is our contribution to global observing. Next slide, please. So what you're taking a look at there in that particular map is all of the networks that we have now managed to network together through data sharing systems. And there are many more out there that we're still seeking. There are on the order of 30,000 of these acoustic receiver units that are present. And in our looking at historic data sets that we've managed to pull down from many places, the pattern is one of anywhere from 20 to 30% of all of the detections of animals that they have in their data sets. They don't have a clue what they are. Nobody ever recorded them. Nobody ever told anybody. And I don't know how many papers in science this represents. And I don't know how many research grants that were foregone because a really exciting something would have been discovered if only people had shared this information. But what we've been doing is knitting these groups together into this international network. What we have now is over 4,000 investigators in 28 countries that are sharing data through this particular system and using the data. We are leveraging off of each other's capabilities and assets to do a much bigger job than we've ever done before. And the problems we're addressing range from local to global, although local tends to dominate almost everybody's initial plunge into this. Next slide, please. In terms of the kinds of questions that are being asked, we can start with questions surrounding the conservation and fisheries management. To give you one example from our part of the world, as the Arctic is opening up, ice is disappearing. We can now get commercial fishing vessels into areas where before only subsistence fishing or local community fishing occurred. This is beginning to cause a conflict between these two groups because we have arbitrary lines that says we don't think the fish from the offshore are moving to the inshore, and we don't think the fish from the inshore are moving to the offshore. Quotas are being set for fisheries, and those are probably being underset at the harm of local communities. We've been able to show that these animals are crossing these lines, and we're beginning to shift where those management lines are to make sure that local communities have an equitable access to those particular fisheries. In terms of other things that we use this for, marine protected areas, NPA is always going to work if you make sure that the animals are within that NPA. Tagging and telemetry will let you know whether the animals are encountering what they need in those NPAs and staying there. We're using it to protect endangered species, following those that are being hunted aggressively, and try to help managers to understand that in this area at this time they are there, and this is a good time to increase your surveillance. We are working on environmental impact assessments as part of this blue growth environment to understand where the pathways are for movements around where new installations are going to go in, and let them try to design them or move them in ways that we're not going to harm those pathways. And we are providing capabilities to respond to this fast changing ocean. So that is my story, and I thank you for listening to it. Thank you.
Fred, well done. That was great to hear. And I see some synergy between what you, Jodica, and Vince have all presented. I guess maybe to tie it all up, it's actually exciting to see all the opportunities we have to understand the ocean better, not just in light of the challenges that the pandemic has created, but also in light of the opportunities that exist by using the ocean sustainably to recover our economy, to conserve our natural resources, and to support our global and American prosperity. So as we move forward, I'm looking at what's happening right now with NASA and moving forward in space exploration, and all that occurred in the last half of the 20th century that caused that era to be called the space age. But I look at all the opportunity and activity of our oceans and the increasing understanding that exploration and mapping is allowing us, and I would wager that this first half of the 21st century is the ocean age. So thank you all for your support in helping us move forward boldly in understanding our oceans in this ocean age of the 21st century. Okay, well, that was a really terrific panel. And before we start the Q&A, just let me say a few things. First off, today let me applaud the National Marine Sanctuaries Foundation and Chris Sari for pulling this event off, this virtual chow. I really am inspired by your commitment to press on and protect biodiversity in our oceans with this great event. And the participation, it just proves how important it is that you're doing this. And Chris, I also want to commend you for your recent statement regarding the racial injustice we're seeing in the country. I really commend your leadership and the example you've set, and we are doing the same both in NOAA and across the government. And then finally, I'd like to make an announcement. Earlier, you heard me talk about the possibility of a new agreement that NOAA was going to sign the Ocean Institute, and voila, it's done. Dr. Vermani and I signed this agreement, and we have announced it today. So perfect timing on this World Oceans Day. Well, before we kick off the Q&A, thank you, I will applaud that too, I'd like to go back to the comment about the ocean age and this new golden age of ocean exploration that was referred to. Now, we've had the administration demonstrate their commitment to a new age of space exploration with the recent SpaceX launch, leveraging the private sector. And we are undertaking the exact same kind of activity, not just in deep space, but in the inner space of our oceans. And we're doing that with these partnerships we've talked about. And so let me ask all of you on the panel, and I'll walk through each one. How do we get the American public more interested in this new age of ocean exploration to a level that we have seen recently in that for space exploration? So first, over to you, Dr. Pieribone.
So thank you, Tim. I think that's sort of the crux of OceanX. That's the crux of what our team is, a problem our team is trying to solve. And our belief is that while getting to space, in our opinion, is a very exciting event, space itself certainly doesn't hold the diversity of life and the beauty that the ocean does. It's almost more difficult to get there in some sense, given the pressures and the cost and the type of vehicles one needs to use. So our somewhat answer to your question, Tim, is that I think the more the world sees and understands the ocean, the more they'll see and understand the beauty and the vitality and the importance of the ocean. Space is exciting, but it doesn't play as important a role in our daily life in any way, shape, or form as the ocean. So I think it's getting out that message and really bringing back that excitement, essentially what we thought in the days when we were younger, Cousteau brought to us, this exploration, this vitality, this getting in there and seeing the beauty of what the ocean has to hold. So our goal is to kind of do that and to encourage our partners and encourage everybody to see the ocean in a different way and to bring that excitement back. So our feeling is excite them and they will come.
Well said, Vince. I like that. And that's the reason that NOAA's partnership with OceanX was one of the very first that we embarked upon after the November 2019 White House Ocean Science and Technology Partnership Summit. How about yourself, Dr. Vermani?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. Obviously, something that we as an oceanographic community have been grappling with for a while. And I completely agree with what Vincent said about making sure we keep the ocean exciting and inspirational, actually. So, for example, that siphonophore that we announced the discovery of in April, that received such enormous public interest and excitement globally, which was great, the one that was discovered off Western Australia. But I think part of what has kept the public interested in the space program and would love to bring it into the ocean is the space community tends to talk about positive stories and keeping that excitement and inspiration alive. And although we have huge issues in the ocean, I think we need to focus and bring in that excitement. And that's what I think exploration does. It introduces that level of the unknown, and it also triggers the imagination. And that's what space stories have done. If you look at the movies, a lot of our imagination comes from the movies and the space stories that we see there. And it'd be great to have that. So I think, the work that OceanX is doing, for example, is part of that. We, on the Falcor, we live stream our ROV dives. We're right now, as I said, on a telepresence cruise, and we've been live streaming, and those are available on YouTube, those videos. And you can see, for example, Nautilus is in the field, which I had never actually seen till I saw that. And it's just beautiful and exciting. So I think maintaining that interest is something that we all need to keep doing.
Absolutely, Joytika. Very well said as well. And, I think that was a part of the reason when we helped draft this presidential memorandum on ocean mapping and exploration, we used language like boldly moving forward, just as in the space program does. And so we think it's positive and exciting as well. And thank you. Dr. Worski, how about yourself?
The magic word there was stories. We have a bunch of stories to tell about the people who are out there doing this work, about the results that they're pulling up. A good story is one where you're facing adversity, things come to a near disaster, but all finishes well in the end, and we end up with a great story. To give you my own personal one, running a cruise in the Bay of Fundy to try to capture endangered Atlantic salmon, understand whether they had diseases that were driving them down, and was watching my trawl running through the water just as a 30-ton right whale surfaced right in front of the trawl. And I'm watching there as the endangered salmon is about to kill an endangered right whale and wondering whether my career in science was finished forever. When there was a little thump, the whale went right through the net, cutting it wide open. He went off quite happy. And at the end of the day, we got our salmon. So the story finished well. And I've never had a problem getting people interested in salmon and right whales when you start with that story.
Outstanding, Fred. Good to hear. Okay, well, we have a number of questions coming in, and I'll ask a few of them, and I'll synthesize and just to be more efficient. But because the topic is biodiversity for this chow, I want to ask your all's thoughts on the role of data mapping and exploration in increasing our understanding of the biological processes of the ocean. So first, Dr. Pieribone.
So I think it might be a shock for people to realize that we've mapped the surface of the moon better than we've mapped the oceans. And that seems depressing since 71% of our surface is covered with ocean. But given the physical nature of the ocean, that it's deep and impenetrable, light doesn't pass through, radio waves don't pass through, it's a really tough media to work in. And yet there's so much life there, there's so much beauty there. So we're using sound. Oceanographers use sound, which is one thing that will travel through water quite well, using sound and really very sophisticated sonar systems to make accurate maps of the ocean. But that requires really mowing the lawn out there and going back and forth. And what happens is the maps that we get from satellites, which are what we see online and the pictures we see are nice, are very low resolution and extremely inaccurate ultimately. So when ships like ours go out and Falcor go out and they use very sophisticated sonar systems, they collect very accurate, high-resolution sonar maps. And that's sort of the beginning. That gives you kind of city-level accuracy. And then to go below that, you got to get down there with other types of sonar systems that can map more locally, or better yet, send down an ROV, send down a submersible to look at what you see. So the initial stage of mapping with sonar systems gives you some idea of these features. They can be enormous features that are completely missed. So things that are the size of the Grand Canyon have not been seen or discovered, and suddenly you find one. Now you want to know, well, what's in the canyon? So it is the first step to finding new ecosystems and new environments. And the next step is get the subs in, get the RVs in, get the humans' eyes down in there and look around and say, what's different and what's special about this? We also have a whole set of new tools, and Tim highlighted the concept of omics, which is something that we've been working on, that Schmidt has been working on. This is the concept of using DNA and sequencing these things in the environment to give you like a seventh sense about what's going on in the ocean. It gives you a little sniff test, and you can identify which organisms might be there, novel ones, new ones, and look at diversity. So it's a really exciting new field that the Human Genome Project has brought to the ocean, in a sense, the ability to do that kind of sequencing. So you map it, you see it, you find it. The next step is get down there and look at it.
Fantastic, Vince. That was really good. You know, we at NOAA, our Alaska Fisheries Science Center, recently got underway several unmanned surface vehicles to perform an acoustic survey of Alaskan pollock, which our ships normally have done, but because of the pandemic, we've not been able to get our crews on board. So a really great example of using novel technologies and adapting to understand and characterize our biology in the world's oceans. Let me ask you, Fred, this is your cup of tea. What are your thoughts about mapping and exploration for understanding biodiversity and biology in the ocean?
It's absolutely critical in our neck of the woods for the work that we're doing. Amongst other things, we need a really good idea of the three-dimensional structure of the habitat that's on the bottom. So mapping that out, understanding the relief, understanding the rocks, understanding how the animals work and use with this, whether there are refuges there when the predators come in, all of that is really, really important in developing an ecosystem model for how various systems are working. And as you look forward into the future, where the fisheries companies are going for things like scallops is being able not only to map the habitats, but to map the locations of the individual scallops. And they're envisaging remote harvesters that will go down and pluck them one by one when it's time to pull them in and run your fisheries. And that would eliminate bottom trawling and the damage that happens there. So this kind of positioning, this kind of mapping is going to be very, very important.
Very good. That's interesting because at NOAA we've adapted some artificial intelligence and machine learning processes to characterize scallop in the Atlantic. And I think those fields of technology are also going to be increasingly important moving forward. Joytica, how about yourself? What role does Schmidt Ocean Institute play in understanding biological processes and biodiversity in the oceans?
So I agree with both Vincent and Fred on the importance and the connection between mapping and understanding biological diversity. So I'm going to add an example where it became a real life, it materialized how important this was. So a while ago, Falco mapped the Marine National Monument of Hawaii, the Papahanaumokuakea National Marine Monument, and that map actually helped to contribute to expanding the protection as scientists on board discovered new information about those seamounts. So again, this is the being able to characterize exactly what's down there. So, discovering new information about the geological age, how they impacted the ecosystem. And then, Tim, going back to the partnership that we've formally announced today with NOAA. So we mapped about 25% of the monument that hadn't been mapped before, especially in the deeper waters, some of which were outside the then existing monument boundaries, and showed the seamounts and those features. And then NOAA's Office of Exploration and Research, OER, came in and used those maps to do diving expeditions where they found new species. And so collectively, that's what led to the expansion of that national monument. So I think there's definite tie-ins and partnerships to make a change here.
Excellent. Yes, I was really pleased to see that work too, and we're excited to see our ships get back underway and work with yours sometime around July. Well, moving on, let's tackle a related area, and I'd like to see your thoughts on the role of exploration in balancing the needs for promoting and protecting biodiversity in the oceans, but also ensuring that we can sustainably use our oceans to the benefit of society. And I'm talking about things like critical minerals, energy, both renewable and non-renewable, fisheries, and pharmaceutical applications. What are your thoughts about that, Vincent?
So this notion of not understanding fully the interactions, the dynamics between the biology in the ocean, the oceanography, and how it affects the depth and the range of the ocean. Our understanding of those principles, for example, in fisheries, to understand not just the fish that inhabit those areas, the fish that we're interested in, but rather all of the prey fields and the prey that they eat in this web of life that sustains those animals. So it is essential to understand all those levels of the ocean in order to answer the question of how and predict in some way the future of these fisheries. And so oceanographers and scientists studying those sort of smaller features, the carbon cycling, the small animals, the plankton, and how they interact and how they move in this three-dimensional structure that the ocean, is the only way you get a clear picture of how your fisheries are sustainable and how their fisheries are looking going forward. In terms of mineral access, there are portions of the ocean that are pretty much like deserts. There are portions of the oceans which just have sand on the bottom and are relatively uninhabited. Then there are portions in the middle of those that are like oases, full of life. So just, accumulating minerals across large areas without knowing what's down there runs the risk of damaging those unique habitats, like we saw in the Northeast Canyons, where you have this ocean floor that's really sandy and muddy, and suddenly you reach these canyons, and the canyons are full of this life. So finding those ecosystems and sort of allowing us to sort of work our way around them and sustain those, so that when we're doing this kind of work in the ocean, we don't damage these places where there's hot spots of diversity. And those areas that on the bottom can also lead to vertical expansions of life off the bottom. So whatever it is that we're utilizing the ocean for, and of course where we place our wind towers, and how we search for oil and minerals and things like that, can be done in a very educated way, in a really thoughtful way, to avoid damaging and destroying directly those resources at the bottom. So the first step is figure out what's there, document it, and then plan out how we get around that. And I know recently NOAA was involved in helping adjust shipping in some parts of America to avoid strikes of ships to to whales. So whales migrating in a certain path, and just by slowly modifying the path of these vessels, you dramatically reduce the amount of animals that are hit. So knowing what's there helps the shipping, helps everybody utilize the ocean in a more efficient, effective, and yet less harmful way, I would propose.
Absolutely, Vincent. Well said. You know, we are involved with all aspects of that, whether it be critical minerals surveys, like we did in the Clarion-Clipperton zone in the Pacific, where we found a high degree of biodiversity, which has been leased for minerals, as well as marine transportation and altering shipping lanes when we know better where whales are and where they move. How about yourself, Jyotika?
Yeah, I think Vincent's absolutely right. I think I would add to that the ocean is just so vast. The habitable space on this planet, 99% of that is in the ocean. And we've not explored most of that. We've only explored about 5% of that. And then our seafloor maps, we have about 15% of the seabed that's mapped at a high resolution. So we can protect the areas that we know and we think are of ecological significance, but there might be something that's just right around the next corner that really needs additional protection. But again, without having a map and knowing what's where and where things are of importance, we can't really do anything. We're basically operating blind. So I think the whole idea of exploration is so fundamental to answering that question, Tim.
Absolutely. You can't really develop responsibly if you don't know what you're going to develop in. And so I thought your example with the siphonophore that had never been discovered was just fantastic. I mean, it was we recently discovered a new species of killer whale in Antarctica, which is just extraordinary when you think about it. There was a large marine mammal that we didn't even know existed. So that's right. Knowing and being able to understand what's there will help us make more responsible decisions going forward. And Fred, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts, I'm going to sound a little bit like an echo to these previous two, but the idea of sustainable development and environmental impact assessment are all tied together with this idea that human activities in the oceans are going to perturb things from whatever the natural state is. So we want to do this in a way that's not causing harm forever. I would point out that the ocean has habitats, the hotspots that Vince was referring to earlier, but it's also a highway. The animals may be moving from point A, hotspot A to hotspot B, but they pass through corridors that are present in there. So as we put in structures, for example, do we want to block the highway without having toll gates or other passages around those? So we need to understand all of these particular connections so that we do this effectively and have our cake and eat it too at the end of the sustainable development process.
Nice. Very well said to you. Thanks, Fred. Okay, well, there's a number of other interesting questions that we could talk about. I'll pick a few. For example, one thing we touched upon was technology. I'd like to ask each of you your thoughts on what might be the most transformational technology out there that will help us better understand the ocean through exploration. And I'm going to go back in reverse order here. So, Fred, I'm going to put you on the spot. What do you think?
I don't think I can point at one technology, and I especially would like to point at the fact now that beginning to combine different technologies is where we're really making massive increases in our understanding. So as you put together an animal telemetry study that shows you the pathways of the animal, and then you mix it in with the DNA of the animal to understand which group of animals that's doing this, which killer whale, for example, is making those movements, then we begin to really truly understand things. So I think that is the pathway forward. And one of the great exciting things is that every year there's a new technology coming forward. Thanks.
I agree. Very exciting. Jyotika, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to just bounce off that, Fred. The merging of different technologies, different sensing capabilities on the same autonomous or unmanned technologies is going to be amazing. I think one thing that I would love to see us be able to perhaps bring along a bit further is underwater communications. So if there was a way that we could improve our underwater communications, then we really open up the ocean for complete monitoring, complete assessment capabilities. Because what we've seen in the last few years is this huge leap forward in robotics and unmanned and autonomous technologies, the more frequent use of things like eDNA. So now I'm looking at what's next. What would be that next technology breakthrough that we could do? And then once we have that capability, then it's just amazing. I've described in the past the Avatar X Prize, which is a robot where the robot can be anywhere. So you can take your robot into the ocean, and you as a human wear a haptic suit so you can see, feel, sense, smell what's in the robot. But without some way of communicating between the robot and your haptic suit, it's going to be very difficult. So they're working on that kind of technology for on land, but trying to do that for underwater requires some advancements yet to be made.
Very insightful. I couldn't agree more. Certainly now, as we are all communicating through telepresence increasingly, that is certainly, I think, well understood right now. Interestingly, I personally have watched the development of optical communications in the ocean advance to a degree where we were talking bits to now, gigabits in just about a decade and a half. So I think there's great potential there, and you've definitely pointed to something very important. Vincent, what do you think?
Well, I'll just touch on that for a moment since you brought it up. Our team has supported the development of optical modems in the ocean, which are exactly what you're talking about, Tim, to some degree, which is a method of using lasers in the ocean that were short range to communicate high bandwidth. And we did the first FaceTime call from our sub at 1,000 meters a while back. And now we've built that technology into the new ship and hope to be live streaming for the first time from an independently moving submersible through an optical fiber to the surface. But the technology that I'm going to jump on is something that I'm going to tell you a little 2-second story, which is sperm whales. Sperm whales swim around on the surface and frolic and look fun during the day. At night, packs of them dive to 1,000 meters for 45 minutes and hunt down giant squid and very fast-moving cephalopods. They do this in a pack way, and they have optimized the ability to use sound to communicate. They're probably the most advanced communicating animal on the earth after a human. They go down there, they do all this amazing communication, and we have no idea what they're doing. We look at them on the surface with binoculars, but when they're down there, we don't know. Along come technology like Siri, that is an automated way of taking these languages that we speak and turning them into meaning. So I'm excited about the idea of applying AI to something like how whales might communicate. So capturing very accurate information about the animals down there as they move around and trying to convert those elaborate sounds that they make into some form of communication. If we can crack the code of the communicating whale, we'll probably have cracked the most advanced animal on the earth aside from a human that's somehow speaking to each other. So can we learn the language and we can figure out what they're saying? Maybe someday we can actually talk to another animal on the earth. So AI and its ability to take huge and complicated and mysterious data sets and turn them into meaning.
Yeah, cool.
That's fascinating, Vincent. Really interesting and a great point. Joytica, did you have something to offer? I heard you try to talk there.
Oh, no. I think I was in wow, that's really great. It's more of a...
I know, exactly. I had to help hold back too. Interestingly, this is all leading to a question here that I'm going to kind of, there was very that came out, and it was about ocean data and how there's been a tsunami of ocean data, and we all know it. We're talking about the contributions of satellites, unmanned systems, ROV technology, which both of you, Vincent and Joytica, use, and so with this tsunami of ocean data, I'd like to know your thoughts on how are we going to manage this going forward? Over to you, Vincent. Sorry.
Okay. I think that part of what's going to be necessary is not only human analysis of this data and humans setting up the constraints and the parameters around the study of it, but again, AI and automated systems that can ingest this information and given a series of commands and stratifications that humans impart upon it, helped evaluate these massive amounts of data. That's been incredibly successful in terrestrial analysis. And also taking that data, and what we're really hot on is the idea of visualizing. There's nothing like the human visual system to take complex data sets and turn them into things that we can ingest and discover from. So having these massive data sets converted into things that are visible and are in the sort of the language of the human will help us examine these. So the combination of computers and humans to work on that data. Of course, first you need to collect the data. The data needs to be accurate, it needs to be stored in accessible repositories. So we sort of hugely applaud the organizations out there, and we're one of them supporting this for the open access and the public access. And we, of course, always applaud NOAA's work on this. I think NOAA is probably the largest generator of data almost in the world of biological data, of oceanographic data, weather data, and making that data available to us. So you're kind of a role model for the rest of us to collect this new type of data that we have, visual data, bathymetric data, put it in places that are accessible to the wider community, but also put it in a way that's ingestible and relatable and analyzable, as it were. So I think that is huge. That Google does a great job with the data that they do. We need to sort of compete on that level.
Very good. You hit on something that's very important to NOAA as an agency, and that's why we have signed cloud utility contracts with 3 commercial cloud providers and embarked on a data and a separate cloud strategy to advance our applications of the commercial and private sector towards handling this data tsunami. What do you think, Fred? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, a couple of them. First off, we saw this one coming when we began to set our project up. So structurally, we changed from the way most projects are organized, and half of my people are really in my data group for developing the data systems and for doing some of the preliminary analysis. So going forward, as you face a mountain of data, you need to have a mountain of data people assigned to the projects right from the start. And that's not currently how we think about how we do this. Secondly, looking at the new classes of trainees that are coming out, the students that are graduating from our universities. At this point in time, they are hyper familiar with large data sets and data analysis in ways that the previous generation was not. I'm hopelessly outdated compared to them, but I'm really optimistic that these people have grown up comfortable working with very, very, very large data sets, and they're going to seamlessly transition into dealing with this. And at the end of the day, what's going to save us all is the fact that we are not going to be able to out-innovate the open source community in terms of analyzing and visualizing this data. So as our platforms make this available, it's going to happen organically. Thanks.
Very good. I couldn't agree with you more there. Excellent. Joytica, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that I think that was in Nature, the data tsunami. I read that yesterday, where I think it was in 2018. We collected more ocean data than over the entire 20th century or something like that. Amazing. And that's because of this new technology. And I think there's some, there's some issues, of course, as we've evolved through as a field on being able to integrate that data, standardize that data. One thing we do, we offer, the Falcor at no cost to any scientist, but in exchange, we asked that they make their data and their findings publicly available. And we also, of course, submit all the data that we collect into national and international data repositories. So data is certainly, I think it's a great question. It's certainly one of those things. I agree with Fred that as we move forward, we need to take data into consideration as equally on a par as we do the technology. So one thing I do see, though, is machine learning and artificial intelligence will really help us in this. So, for example, actually, Tim, the bonus prize that we had for the Ocean Discovery X Prize with NOAA was kind of based on this, using machine learning to be able to track the source of a chemical or biological signal underwater. And so I think that machine learning, needing data in the first place to train the machines to do things, but then using artificial intelligence will help us to find and analyze data. So I think this whole field is also about to change in the next few years.
Very good, exactly. And that's why we, in addition to our unmanned systems strategy, NOAA's developed an artificial intelligence strategy for that exact purpose. Well, my close colleague from the Ocean Studies Board, Susan Roberts, had a great question, and I think you've led up to this point in your remarks, and that is, with the changing conditions of our oceans, which NOAA sees and studies and assesses every day, with regards to fisheries in Alaska, to the nature of global atmospheric temperature. What are the implications of those changes to how we map and explore the ocean? What are your thoughts on that? Are we going to do things differently as we move forward into the next century? What do you think, Joytika?
I think that we are obviously we're going to do things differently because we now have all this new technology that we never had even 10 years ago. I think, again, I go back to the why are we even doing exploration? It's because so little is known, so we don't really even have baseline data. So assessing changes that are happening, it's really hard to do that without having a first baseline look at what's out there. So I think that's where I think the technology will really kick in, and this is what we're doing. We're the Falcor's been on this. It's on a year-long cruise expedition around Australia, most of which has not been seen. It's the ROV Sebastian. It can go down to 4,500 meter depth, and those are all places that have never been seen before. So it's gathering that baseline information, gathering that data, and then being able to assess changes from that.
Very good. Thank you. How about yourself, Vincent?
Well, I was telling my 5th grade son's class recently, before the COVID took us all out of school, every second breath we breathe comes from the ocean, right? So we can't stress enough. I can't think of anything more valuable than breath. We can't stress enough the value and the importance of the ocean, and the things that have been going on, and these changes that may seem somewhat esoteric, changes. We hear changes in pH and warming and seem distant and remote. I can tell you as an explorer who spent his life traveling around the ocean and looking in various ways, every way we look, we see this shifting baseline. And small changes over a large space like the ocean can have dramatic effects on our society and our world. So it is crucial, and that is why space exploration being exciting doesn't have that same import or impact on our lives. What has impact on our lives is ensuring that we monitor those changes that are happening. And because the baseline, as Joytika just said, is very important, understanding where the baseline is for the ocean's ability to support our lives. If we understand that support system that it has in place, and we map it and document it and monitor it, and NOAA is probably the leader in that respect on the Earth, is monitoring that life support system that keeps all of us alive. Not just the food, but the oxygen and the weather, and everything is dependent on that ocean. So it is absolutely essential to explore, but at the same time document and establish this data set so we know the health of this thing, because it is moving. It is no doubt it is moving. We see it in acidification. We see it in these changes that have visual and dramatic effects on the ocean. So we've got to be in there looking at this thing. It's way too important for our lives to not do that. And that's why I think everybody in this roundtable and everybody's here to look at, to not only the grandeur and beauty of it, but its health and its well-being and how we are impacting it has got to be top priority for humans.
Thank you, Vincent. Fred, I hate to cut you short, but we got a minute and a half. So can you answer that in 30 seconds or less?
The Arctic's the flashpoint. This is probably the place where it's going to change the most. We're poised for a mass exchange of fauna between the Atlantic and Pacific through the Northwest Passage at this point in time. So it's going to be partnerships to get up into this hostile environment and get the equipment down to be able to document what's going on up there.
Wow, you just packed a whole lot in a little bit. Very good. Well, let me just say thanks, everybody. Thanks our panelists with a virtual round of applause, please. And thank you, Chris Sari and the National Marine Sanctuaries Foundation for hosting this. And to all of you, I'll just close with a couple thoughts. First off, there is a final question here, which I'll go ahead and take on. And Zachary Zabar has asked, what is our advice for young career professionals who are embarking on on a career in ocean science, and my advice is that you really are at a time you are coming into a field that's more important than ever. And so understand that and appreciate that this is such a dynamic and important field to help us advance our oceans for not only conservation, but sustainable use and the health and prosperity of humanity. So stay excited. This is an important area, and everybody who's been involved in participating in this great virtual chow, thank you.
Thank you, Admiral Gallaudet, Joyotica, Fred, and Vince for an insightful discussion. And thank you to all of our speakers who participated in Chow 2020. You helped us make this a successful conference. I want to thank all of our sponsors, and especially want to thank NOAA, our signature sponsor, and our presenting sponsors, the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation and the David and Lucille Packard Foundation. Thank you for your continued support of Chow. And thank you all of you who made individual contributions to Chow this year. Your support allowed us to use this online platform to reach a broader audience to discuss the important issue of marine biodiversity conservation. You truly are our ocean champions. It takes a lot of staff and hard work to pull off Chow. And I want to thank my staff at the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation for their dedication and their hard work. They spent a number of hours over countless months pulling a tremendous program together. And it's been difficult working in the virtual environment and not being together physically as a team. I think they did a tremendous job, and I hope you will join me in thanking them all for their very hard work. Now, before you go, I hope you'll pop into one of the virtual happy hours. It's a chance to keep the conversation going. You can see old acquaintances, make new friends, learn a new skill. I'm excited about ocean origami in particular. Or just take some time to hang out and talk about the interesting topics that were covered today and anything new that you might have learned. And next year, please join us June 7th, 8th, and 9th for Chow 2021. We're going to be tackling a pressing issue. It's the issue of race, diversity, inclusion, and equity in the ocean and Great Lakes conservation movement. It's a conversation that we need to be having today, tomorrow, and long into the future. The injustice that is taking place in our society is something that we all need to play a role in tackling. We need to have honest, difficult conversations in order to create change. So I hope you will join us for that conversation, but more important, I hope you will join us in trying to identify solutions to address these issues. I hope you enjoyed Chow 2020. I look forward to seeing you in person at Chow 2021. Good evening.